All right. All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending our session today, Creating Connected Communities and Histories Through Open Pedagogy and OER. My name is Amanda Marquez.
And I am Jennifer Epley Sanders.
And we're going to be presenting today on how we have made an effort to create these connected communities using open pedagogy and OER. And we'll go into more detail about what that looks like for us in our respective classrooms. So just to give you a sense of what the agenda is for today, again, we're just going to give us a brief introduction to ourselves, give an overview of what the presentation content will be about. We'll go over some key concepts. We'll go into some discussion about the relationship between open pedagogy and OER tools. And also, hopefully there'll be time for discussion at the end where we can talk about how it might be possible for us to retool existing definitions of open pedagogy. And again, to center community, which is really what the goal of our presentation is. And then we'll provide some practical applications using this approach in and out of the classroom. And like I said, hopefully we'll have enough time to have some really good conversation with you guys and answer any questions you might have about the content.
And just a quick note that all the images that you'll be seeing on today's presentation are murals that have been created by local artists in our hometown of Corpus Christi, Texas.
Okay, all right. So we are located at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Primarily, like I mentioned earlier, my name is Amanda Marquez. I have a master's degree in history, and I've been a faculty member at TAMU CC since 2011. My personal background, just to kind of give you a sense of how this might inform my teaching praxis, I'm first generation. I am from South Texas, native South Texan or Tejano. I'm Mexican American, and I am what I call a working class academic. And so in sharing this with all of you, I want to impart that, my biography, my identities shape how I, am able to interact with students, and then the instructional methods and the choices that I make to reach students who might be of similar backgrounds and experiences. I primarily teach first-year seminar courses as part of learning communities, which we have here at our university. And I also teach an upper division history course for majors centered on Mexican American women.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm Jennifer Epley Sanders. I have a master's degree and a PhD in political science. And like Amanda, I have worked at TAMU CC for some time, in my case, since 2010. As for my own personal background, I'm also a first generation college student and graduate student. And my family is a military family, so we call ourselves Navy brats. And I also have an immigrant family as well. I'm biracial and multicultural, so my dad is American and my mom is Filipino. And although we were a military family, growing up, we had quite a low socioeconomic status. And so that also informs my life in general, but also my outreach and teaching pedagogy. In my case, for teaching at TAMU CC, I teach in the core curriculum program. So the introductory required political science courses, specifically US government and politics. And then I also teach in the political science major, and those are primarily in comparative politics and international relations. And a note about our student population, our student that we interact with on a regular basis are a mix of what we would consider traditional as well as non-traditional students from diverse cultural, social, economic, political, and other demographic backgrounds. And some of those backgrounds map onto or are similar to Amanda and myself, and others are different, but we are aware of and work with and for on diversity. And so to start, we thought it would be helpful to provide a bit of background or foundation from Hegarty 2015. Hegarty identifies arc of life learning, which is, quote, a seamless process that occurs throughout life when participants engage in open and collaborative networks, communities, and openly shared repositories of information in a structured way to create their own culture of learning, end quote, as the foundation for open pedagogy. And Hegarty lists 8 overlapping attributes of an open pedagogy model of teaching and learning. And these 8 attributes are participatory technologies, people, openness, trust, innovation, and creativity, sharing ideas and resources, connected community, learner-generated, reflective practice, and peer review. And as we've mentioned, they are overlapping and they might vary or need to be adapted depending on the course and the professor, the student population, institutions, as well as the before, during, and after political, and environmental, economic, climate, the larger context in which we are operating in higher education. And so for us, we wanted to focus for this presentation on the connected community element. And so we have a quote on the side underneath the presentation overview heading, which reads, "Learning does not take place in silos or should be compartmentalized. Course content and students' lived experiences work in tandem and are interrelated." And so from Amanda and myself, we, as well as our students, do not check our identities at the door, so to speak. And instead, connected community for us is the primary driving force for how we as faculty think about and apply open pedagogy in our respective courses. We believe that current and future educators must reconceptualize existing definitions of open pedagogy to prioritize connected community in order to empower students. And toward that end, open pedagogy necessitates a focus on the value of community and the shared collective use of resources and knowledge. Connected community involves acknowledging and supporting the student as a whole person and respecting the knowledge and experiences that they bring to the classroom. And connected community is not just limited, though, to just the members of that classroom. It extends to the communities and the networks from which students are members. So we really try to operate from and teach our students to work from a strengths-based position, not one in terms of negative or weaknesses, if you will.
So, in kind of, laying that sort of framework and looking at connected community, some of the key concepts that we're going to go over throughout the rest of the content of the presentation is, how open pedagogy helps facilitate cross-cultural communication. And in so doing, right, the community also comes to the community in the classroom and beyond, hopefully, depending on what it is you decide to do in your courses, greater cross-cultural understandings amongst the students, right? And then collaboration by creating open educational resources, right? Enable students to feel, to see that they are facilitators of learning themselves. They are creators of content. And really, like Hegarty suggested in her piece, that learning is not only facilitated by the teachers, but it's facilitated by the students. So immersion and using and creating OER, again, it takes a significant amount of practice and development of those specific attributes that were mentioned earlier. But ultimately students experience more openness, connectedness, trust, and in the process, they're also innovating, innovating their learning, innovating the content that they're creating, again, but they're doing this through that collaboration and that sense of community. Okay, so for this next section, there's 3 things that we wanted to touch on that we felt really were critical to understanding our pedagogy and sort of how we embed open OER into our courses. And so the focus for the next, few slides is going to be, touching on this notion of pedagogy of kindness, ways that we attempt to help students navigate their multiple, diverse, and cultural identities and spaces. This could even, be navigating just spaces within the university. And also, I'll spend some time kind of talking about, we'll spend some time talking about how learning communities can also create this sense of connectedness and community at a time when that's so critically important. I think we can all agree that. Right.
And as a note to this, I added that this whole process involves both thinking about and doing, right? So there's the planning and there's the implementation aspect, but it's an iterative process and it ebbs and flows. And in some cases it might be cyclical, sometimes it might be these jagged jumps. But there's an idea that this is an ongoing developmental process, if you will, both for the faculty member or instructor and for the students. And so that thinking and doing is important before, during, and after one has a class, as well as paying special attention to the concept and actual measures of, if you will, of resources. What are available, tangible or intangible, to you, as well as to your students. So an example of this might be brainstorming and comparing syllabi plans with your peers, for example, to hit on the pedagogy of kindness, or navigating multiple and diverse cultural identities, or redesigning, if you need to, a learning community or whatever other high impact practices that you're doing. And this kind of peer review process can happen at different stages, and they could be smaller, they could be larger endeavors, they could be formal or informal if you happen to need certain types. But we didn't want it to come across as this is just a one size fits all, and that if you do, one course, you're all set and you won't have to revisit these concepts or tools down the road.
Okay, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this notion of the pedagogy of kindness. As a faculty member of color, as a woman, and working in the program that I primarily teach in, which is a first-year learning communities program. I work with primarily first-year students. A way our learning communities are structured are, there's a first-year seminar course that's connected to 2 or more other core curriculum courses. And so, for first-year students, they have a very particular set of needs. And so in, the last, 12 years that I've been teaching in the learning communities program, your practice shifts, semester to semester, year to year. And so, more and more students that were first generation, students of color, similar, biographies to mine, I was really engaged in a lot of mentorship with those students and connecting them to resources. And, I had, revamped how I was, conducting office hours, just these different practices that I was, employing to try to reach as many students as I could and to try to support them and direct them to resources so that they could be successful. But I had never, I didn't know if there was an actual name or, a notion connected to those practices. And so I came across an article by a historian named Catherine Denial on Twitter of all places. And I read her piece, and I've included the link there for anyone that's interested in reading it. And it was called The Pedagogy of Kindness. And so she wrote about her experiences in kind of employing this pedagogy. And the more I read the piece, the more I came to realize this is what I've been employing. I just didn't know it. And so I included the quote from Bell Hooks's piece, Teaching to Transgress, because in the process of employing this pedagogy of kindness, right, you're making, as the instructor, you're making these very specific choices, right, about, you know, how you're delivering your content, how your students are clear about the expectations are. And sometimes that stuff can be kind of fixed, you know, and it needs to be shifted a little bit to meet your students' needs. And so that can be a little bit uncomfortable for a faculty member. And so I read the piece, thought about my own practices. I came to realize that in my courses, you know, my goals are always to see students as collaborators, that they learn through consensus and consensus with others, their peers, but also with me as the instructor, and that students can make valuable contributions if we allow them the space for them to do so, while acknowledging the diversity of their backgrounds, their identities, and their perspectives, right? And so in doing that, right, it means that as a faculty member, we have to invest in a student's personhood and their development. And so to demonstrate kindness, it doesn't equate to being nice. Rather, it is to acknowledge that students are individuals, they're people living out in the world who are managing their lives, their education, their obligations, whether they are, you know, community obligations, family obligations, but nevertheless, they're all in need of that critical support. And so, you know, this, we've got to be careful. I'm trying to be careful. Education, you know, just higher education in general, right, is experiencing a little bit of, you know, some tension, because there seems to be, you know, it's sort of a transactional model, you know, that could be, you know, that's being employed by some institutions. And so we all know as educators, you know, it's not a transactional thing, right? Learning and development, that transactional model undermines that learning and development. And so when we make an effort to build relationships to students, right, we develop that trust, it enables learning to occur and for students to thrive in their learning environment and beyond, right? So treating, like Jennifer mentioned earlier, right, looking at the student as a whole person. And I, you know, just to reemphasize, just to reiterate that kindness does not equate just being nice. You know, kindness can happen in many forms. For me, it's having honest and direct conversations with the students, right? Finding ways to connect to them, you know, beyond the classroom. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, very briefly, I rebranded my office hours. So they're called student hours now, where students can come and visit, and that time is just for, and I reiterate to them that it's just for them. And it's in those interactions and the way that relationships are established in those meetings, then students, be that trust, that relationship begins to build between me and them. And so the goal really, again, is for students to see that, you know, membership in the classroom, on the campus, and local communities is critically important, right? Their voice, their perspective, their presence matters. And so when we create a hospitable environment for student learning and we make those meaningful connections between ourselves and them to their peers, right? Only then, right, can we become truly a community. And so one of the pieces that really informed my practice in working with first-year students was a piece I read by Haswell and Blaylock, Hospitality and College Composition Courses. This is not, the practices that they embed in this article are not limited to just writing courses. They can be applicable to any discipline, any practitioner. Again, the center point, I think, and the argument of their piece is that you create a hospitable environment, welcome students in, right? Welcome them into your office, welcome them into the classroom, acknowledge their personhood, demonstrate to them that you are invested in not only how they perform in your class, but also who they are as people. And so I think that when you make that a center point of what you're doing, or a focal point of what you're trying to, that relationship you're trying to establish with the students, when the time comes for them to become creators of content and of information, right? Then they begin to take ownership. They begin to develop that sense of authority. And at the same time, their perspectives, their lived experiences, their connections to the larger community, all of that, right? That the lives they live outside of the classroom helps inform what they create. And again, that investment that they have in creating those things is, I think, that much more powerful. All right.
And so in terms of practical applications or concrete examples of this in practice as it relates to open educational resources, we've listed a few examples here of what we have done in our own classes. So for instance, you might, like us, use OpenStax or College Success as a starting point to look for OER to embed in your courses. We think of OER as not just content for learning, but also as a way of doing assessments as well. So an example of that would be students creating OER. And Amanda will be able to give some more examples about the Wiki Education and Google's Tools projects. In my case, we might have open access content links by unit and assignment where you are using OER for the content, but also developing OER as a demonstration of quote mastery of the material for that course or the methods involved. Depending on the level of course and type of assignment, you can also have students create OER using YouTube. And in my own case, I've had major students conduct extensive research and then present that research in the form of public service announcements. So it ties together the course itself, but is also providing value added to the community about potential issues that they care about. And in my particular case, it's an interesting dance or synergy because the students are working with the subfield of international politics, right? Or international relations or comparative politics. And so sometimes it's a bit harder for them to connect those dots all the way back to what's going on at the local level and within their communities, but they are able to do it when you scaffold the material and the learning, but also create an environment where they can leverage each other as well in the courses. So maybe Amanda, if you wanted to expand a little bit on the Wiki project in particular.
Yes. Yes. All right. So speaking, like Jennifer mentioned, research and researching something that that students really care about. There's two ways that I use just different types of tools for students to create OER. Like I mentioned before, I teach first-year seminar courses as part of a learning community that's connected to 2 other core curriculum courses. And so for that particular course, I use a lot of different functions in Google Tools where students, because in the first-year seminar course, it's, our program here is really centered on helping students transition from high school to university. And so for, some of the topics that are covered in the OpenStax College Success text, time management, study tips, study strategies, just very basic intro to university college life. This is how, these are just some things to be mindful about. And, as you're kind of proceeding through your courses. So since our learning communities have an integrative curriculum, and we do that intentionally, I try to take cues and content from the other courses that I'm connected to and embed some of those that content area knowledge, but also give students different ways of thinking about it, different ways of learning, giving them different study strategies. So for the Google Tools, students create a lot of infographics. They use Google Docs to communicate with one another, to share content, do peer review. I even created a landing page for all of their Google Drive accounts so that students can access each other's folders, you know, if there's a collaborative assignment that's going on. But using Google Drive and the specific tools really helps students to feel connected, even if they're not physically in the same space. And so that was particularly helpful and useful, you know, throughout the last, you know, 18 months when we were, you know, doing things largely online. And especially for first year students, you know, campus life is big for them. It's a big thing, an important thing for all students. But I think for first year students, that first year and getting, you know, involved in campus life and feeling connected to other students, that sense of connectedness is what keeps them persisting throughout their first year. And so I used Google tools as a means for us to still have that sense of connectedness, right? And for students to get to know one another, even if we only saw each other face to face once a week in the classroom. And it was very successful. When it comes to, you know, the other core, I'll always tell folks I'm kind of like a Jill of all trades. I not only teach the first year seminar courses in the learning communities, but I also teach an upper division, you know, history course, and it's about centered on Mexican American women. And so for that course, you know, I had been, you know, sort of, you know, doing a little research on open pedagogy, OER, open source, you know, just trying to figure out, well, what was out there. And yeah, I just been kind of dabbling. And so because I was teaching this course, you know, the more research that I did, you know, there was very little visibility of Mexican American women, like just online in general, and maybe in a digital archive, but again, not anything that was widely accessible to the public, with the exception of maybe the, you know, Texas State Historical Association's website, which is wonderful. But I was trying to think, how could we, you know, how can my students reach a wider audience? So I got invited to participate in a Wikipedia edit-a-thon. And so the more I started doing some research on Wikipedia, and then I, you know, connected with a colleague who connected me to this training for Wikipedia through Wiki Education, and said, you know, they're actually trying to encourage college instructors, you know, college professors to embed Wikipedia into their courses using this Wiki Education program. And so I connected with someone from Wiki Education. They provided me the training and the tools. And the goal of Wiki Education was really to highlight marginalized voices, marginalized histories. And so just based on the research that I had done over that summer, I decided, you know, this is what my students are going to do for that 4,000 level history course. They're going to create articles for Wikipedia about Mexican American women. And so while Wikipedia, the Wiki Education Foundation provided me a lot of materials to help students to figure out how to, you know, create that content, right? There was like Jennifer mentioned for her course, is a strong research component. So while we're also, you know, the students are reading and engaging with all this content that I had selected for the courses. And so the Wiki Education project became this incredible learning experience, not only for the students, but also for myself. For the students, right, you know, the research they had to engage in, choosing a topic, looking at what gap they were going to have to fill that existed on Wikipedia. And again, being invested in something that they were very passionate about and figuring out, you know, the appropriate way to communicate their knowledge, their expertise on the topic to a global audience. The stakes were kind of high, and some of them felt, you know, kind of pressured, but nevertheless, right, the way that I encourage students to persist with the process, because again, it's a process, was to create communities, smaller communities amongst themselves in the classroom, have people that that are working on similar topics, work with those folks, right? As creators of content and information, right, you have this responsibility, and students felt that innate sense of responsibility. And at the same time, they also felt like this sense of authority. Like, I know enough about this, I'm going to put it out there for the public. And so that sort of compelled them forward, and made very strategic and very mindful choices about how they, you know, produced the content and had it go live on Wikipedia. And I've been doing this for 3 semesters. 2 semesters with upper division history majors. And then for the first time, the last fall, I had my undergraduate first year students dabble with Wikipedia. And I think that when students know that they have that responsibility, that their writing, their research, their knowledge is going to go out into the public and share marginalized histories, they just have a different sense of investment, different level of investment, because their writing is going to go out into the world and make things happen. You know, it takes on a life of its own.
And I just wanted to emphasize Amanda's point about the communities within the community in your classroom. So you can do that informally by encouraging students to work together, but you can also do it formally depending on the type of course that you have. And so you might embed, for example, support systems amongst the students so that they have the support amongst themselves, but also building that culture of trust amongst themselves to take the risks that we want them to be able to take in terms of learning. In my own classroom at the majors level, I model them after political science oriented think tanks. And so there is a lot of group work, aka collaborative learning. And what happens is the groups are allowed to work with each other, and they're able to work as an entire class. So each group would submit their own work, for example, whether it's a YouTube video or a problem set or even an essay. So there's a lot of teamwork involved, but I don't restrict it in a competitive sense. So the students are surprisingly, when I first started doing it, they were nervous because that's not usually how it's done. But now you'll see big groups at the library, for example, where they're all working on a police project, right? And they learn that they can disagree, they can have different pathways to success, they can have different interpretations of the assignment, and so they're teaching and learning with each other, which has a lot of advantages for the professor as well, for the class. And so moving forward, we hope that you'll start or perhaps continue to facilitate discussions around navigating multiple and diverse cultural identities and spaces, leverage the strengths of individuals and groups, utilize the power of sharing to connect, acknowledge and respect the value of stories and nuances, and share the importance of kindness and compassion for community building.
So I know we went through quite a bit of content. So we're going to open up the floor to questions, comments, suggestions.
Yes, in our brief time here, we want to build a bit of community if
Yes.
we can. And my understanding is we can go a bit over time as well. But if you need to head out, we totally understand. And maybe before folks leave, Amanda, do you mind going to the next slide? Because it has our contact information.
Yes, absolutely.
We're happy to share our slides. We're happy to help with questions or concerns. And we're also very much open to learning from you all too.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or give a comment.
Hello?
Yeah, hi.
Yes, hi.
Hi. This is Jim Luke from Lansing Community College. And my question is first of all, I want to say before I ask the question is, I'm just really excited by the presentation and by the work you've done and how you framed this as building community and in particular connecting to the local community. And part of the reason I'm really excited about it is I've been running kind of a domains of one's own program at a community college for about 5 or so years, and I'm actually kind of realizing it's less of a domains of one's own as a community of our own project. And this idea of connecting through the open pedagogy and open resources to build a connection between students and the local community in particular, and their identities in the community is really exciting. And it's part of what I'm trying to write up my experiences in learning now. I'm on sabbatical to write a book about it.
Yeah.
We'll see if that ever gets published, but
Yay,
it'll
how
be at
exciting.
least public, openly distributed. So I guess my question is, have you considered or have you done anything? I mean, the presentation is great, but you've done a lot of background research here. You've obviously been doing an enormous amount of thinking through conceptually. Have you published, or have you thought about doing that, or collaborating in it? Because this is, I think this is enormously important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we're excited for youth
Yes.
as well, and feel free to stay in touch. And so, yes, our hope is to turn this into a publication. For a very long time, our university was, I guess, what you would characterize as teaching intensive. And we have more recently transitioned to an R2 status. And so there are definitely expectations and increasingly support for research. So we're excited to go down that pathway for this project.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I'll definitely be in touch, and I'm just really excited, and I would love to collaborate. That would be awesome.
Cool. Thank you.
I just wanted to say really quickly that with the local community connection, and I probably should have explained this earlier, but I'm explaining it now. So Corpus Christi is sort of this, especially in Texas, it's sort of this, it was this hotbed of activity for the Mexican American Civil Rights Movement. And so there's a lot of local history here that hasn't been documented, that at least has not been documented on Wikipedia. And it hasn't really, or in other spaces also. And so our students, the students in my courses were primarily from the local community. And so I encourage them to choose topics, right? Talk to their families, talk to people in their neighborhoods, right? Get a sense of, well, what should be covered? That's from Corpus Christi that we could represent here, how we can represent that on Wikipedia. And so, lots of my students produced work about, the Tejana, musicians, never been done before on Wikipedia. Added some things to the Selena page, because Selena is like our, she's like our person here in Corpus. So just choosing just very, specific, like civic leaders, civic organizations, that were, powered by women and women's efforts here in the city and in South Texas. And so a lot of history here that just hasn't been documented. And so this gave students a chance to research and write about, go into the community and talk to others and really figure out, okay, what is most significant? How can I represent it in this particular space? And so this past spring, I had 26 students in the course. 18 out of the 26 did local topics or South Texas regional topics. And Wikipedia had sent me a notification that 77,000 views of just those 18 pages had accrued 77,000 views in 30 days.
Wow.
So they really were reaching a wide audience. So
well, and it has,
yes, so I love local community connections. It's great.
And it has such long run, I'm an economist, so it's, public good aspects. Given that our students, whether you're talking, if you're talking anything other than, the most elite flagships or elite universities, the vast majority of students come to the college and end up spending their life. They're going to college near where they were born and raised, and they're going to end up being in this same community. And being part of it. So we just strengthen that whole community life. It's
for sure. Yes. And absolutely, Jim, that's correct. I think from the political science angle, we are aware that a lot of our students will stay in the area and the region a little bit more broadly, or go away and come back, so to speak, right? And so one of the things that we do in political science is try to have applied examples, right? So we're connecting to the history as Amanda is doing, but fast forwarding a bit, right, to the contemporary public policy or economic problems that our city faces. And so while we are very proud of Corpus Christi, we are not without some challenges or difficulties as well in terms of politics or legal issues or the economy, et cetera. And so it often really helps when students are supported to make those connections, that the things that they're reading from around the world in my classes are actually quite relevant to their communities here, and that they can make a difference. So for instance, whether that means different forms of political participation engagement, right? So on Amanda's end, there's definitely this emphasis on sharing educational knowledge, right? And histories. And on my end, it's like, okay, now what are you going to do about that, right? Regarding your local, right, and state and national governments, right? Beyond just voting, for example. So they see that happening in other locales, but trying to help empower them that they can do that too here. Well, if it's all right with you, we'll move to the next question.
Sure.
Amanda, in the chat.
Sorry, I can just interrupt. No, it's okay. I just want to let you all know that the session is officially ended, and I'm going to turn off the recording.
Thank you.